Hello, and welcome to the Sonic Fruit Film Podcast, where we aim to celebrate movies through the simple act of talking about our favourites. I'm Bennett Maples, and today I'm joined by the eternal light that is Sam Hoad, media academic and Picture House employee, and the wingless flight that is Carl Cole, composer and Sonic Fruit's resident Foley artist. In this episode, we're discussing Heat, which was not an exploration of the first law of thermodynamics that we'd hoped for, but is, in fact, a cracking movie. So we're talking about Heat, which is, quite frankly, always in my top movies. It's one of my favourite films of all time. So you might have to shut me up. But it has a lot of haters. Not haters, but I know a lot of people that don't necessarily like it. And I'm going to go out on a limb from the beginning and say it's because it's long.
Yeah.
Which I think you mentioned.
Not many films, I think, of that kind were that long in that era.
At this time. I mean, now it would not be uncommon for a film to be heading in the 3-hour direction.
Yeah.
Because films want to try and be epic. But yeah, it was strange, I think, for a filmmaker to have that kind of control and not have the studio say, "We love it. Cut another 15 minutes out of it, and we'll put it out."
Yeah.
And I would also say, on that note, I found it long. The first time I saw it, I remember actually thinking it was flagging a little bit. It was one of those films that I came out of and went, oh, I loved that. But I wasn't sure at the time that I was watching it.
Well, I came out thinking, what was that? Because I saw it at the cinema, and admittedly I would have been, mid-teens and possibly not equipped to appreciate it on the levels that it, desires. But all I remember thinking was that shootout was amazing, but God, it went on, and yeah. Obviously, I've since revised that opinion, but it felt long at the cinema, definitely.
For me, what happens is there's about 20 minutes, 30 minutes in the middle that probably most filmmakers would take out. And I think these days you would take out. But it gives you so much depth of character. When it all starts to unravel at the end, when it all starts to unfold, the amount that you find you care for the characters, and I'm sure it's because you've spent that extra bit of time with them.
Yep.
You've seen them through those extra few bits. There's lots of sequences. I mean, Ashley Judd's having an affair. I mean, in terms of the main plot of the film, that's not really necessary, but it's a catalyst for how they're able to try and get her on side at the end. So, yeah, I find it deeply rewarding because it's so long. And this is one of the very few films that I've ever said that about. Generally, I'm very in favour of taking that extra 20 minutes out. But, Carl, you said you looked at it and went, 3 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, it is long. But with today's mindset on films, it doesn't feel that long now. So maybe you could say it was maybe ahead of its time in that way. The fact that depth of character, depth of storytelling is there, so that when for me, the kind of climax of the film isn't at the end. It's about, I don't know, half an hour from the end. The big bank shootout scene.
That shootout is, as you say, is very much the highlight in terms of there being any sort of action.
Yeah,
and it's quite a long way from the
because
end.
I think that's ultimately it's that point that you know what's going to happen in the end. You know that it's all come crashing down for the bad guys, and you know how the whole thing is going to resolve. But I think it rewards the viewer, and I think a lot of films, certainly of that era, were very 90 minutes on the dot, lots of explosions, not that much in the way of depth of character. Certainly when it came to that sort of bombastic action film, we're very deep in the era of Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal movies. So, I think Heat stands up pretty well in light of that.
Upbringing, coming out here.
Yeah, completely.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. I think any filmmaker would probably pretty much say, if you're making a genre piece now, Heat changed everything. That shootout was a big thing. I remember at the time, I didn't see it at the cinema, I saw it actually on video, but I remember that being talked about. I remember, very much on the release of the film, that was the scene. This was in a period where people actually talked about film in a news sense. That was quite a big deal. It's very visceral. There's that incredible music cue clicking along underneath it, but it doesn't, it isn't pushed in the mix
No,
like
it
it would
doesn't.
be.
No, if
And
I can relate what it was like in the cinema, I've never and haven't since. This was the ABC on Prince of Wales Road in Norwich, which was, not a high-tech cinema, but the sound was absolutely amazing. The gunfire, which still, really rumbles on telly, but in the cinema context, and like you say, that track underneath, but the gunfire, I've never experienced sound like that ever since, So that shows quite how technically amazing it was.
Yeah.
I had to
even then.
strain my ears to listen for the music cues sometimes in that film because the music is so low in the mix. And there's other times where
It's a really dynamic. The whole mix is
Yeah.
really dynamic. They're not afraid for dialogue to be very quiet, and the music is very, 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 very quiet. Certainly by today's standards, but I think it was then as well.
Well, I think nowadays this would almost certainly have been scored by Hans Zimmer, and it would have a very sort of big, traditional, explosive score that would accompany the action on the screen. And the composer Elliot Goldenthal has done. It's an incredible job because most of the time he's just very subtly playing what's going on screen. And actually, there's scenes where I would have expected there to be music. And there isn't. There's an amazing scene right in the middle of the film where they meet up and go for a coffee.
Absolutely.
Which, I mean, the fact that I'm even suggesting that, the two principal characters who are enemies meet up and just go and have a chat makes it seem very banal and rubbish. But it's amazing. And right towards the end of that scene, there's a really subtle cue that comes in that actually is really sentimental. It's very kind of, because they start to open up, they talk about their dreams, they talk about the problems they're having with their families and things. And in terms of character development, for me, that was the scene that completely opens the film up. And also score-wise, it
is a romantic moment in the sense that the empathy that has developed between them has suddenly become an issue. That these two are going to face each other again, and they're going to have to.
Did you know that actually happened? You know that the criminal, Macaulay, I think his name is, was a real guy, a real criminal, and the investigating officer, the policeman who was trying to track him down, actually met with him and had a coffee, and apparently
I did know that.
You did know that.
Yeah.
See,
That's
I
amazing.
thought I was going to blow you away by my
I'll tell you
full
why I know
knowledge
that.
there.
I'm going to reach over to my
your Heat Encyclopedia.
my BFI Modern Classics here, which I have read, although probably most of it I've forgotten. Otherwise, I could be much more insightful today. But
and I knew that little fact watching that
he
scene.
was a consultant on the whole film.
Really?
But
I knew that fact watching that scene, and yet it felt so natural and apparently word for word very close to the actual dialogue that they spoke to each other. So, fascinating, really fascinating, and a really pivotal moment in the film for me.
Well, the heart of the film in the sense of that sentiment of there's much more that unites us than divides us. They're basically two halves of the same person. They're doing exactly the same
But it's
thing.
the story of two men obsessed with their work, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And how they've both fallen either side of the fence, I guess.
Which is part of, again, what you were saying about that last half hour when everything starts to unravel. That it's already been revealed to us that basically it's not going to go well for them. We already know that, but we care. We're not just rooting for the cops. It's not a standard kind of cops and robbers where you're like, oh yeah, the good guy's going to take down the bad guy.
Yeah,
you kind of don't want them to take down the bad guy.
Well, the real villain is is Waingro.
Yeah.
He's the real villain for me in the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he's the one that's unhinged and
doesn't live by the code.
Exactly. So, and it's ultimately him that brings it all to a head. So, yeah.
Because one of the more interesting parts, or one of the interesting parts, I think they're probably all really interesting, but Val Kilmer, I mean, we'll come probably back to his role as a whole, but the scene at the end where he pulls up outside the house and he looks up and he's so happy to see Ashley Judd and he thinks like they've got away scot-free, and then she just motions to him and he has to get back in the car and leave. And as he gets to the end of the road, there's just a shot looking at his face, and it doesn't do anything, and he doesn't say anything, and he doesn't really pull an expression, but all of the film has built to he has nowhere to go and nothing to do, and his life is just, empty. It's just such a powerful...
And this is why I think I didn't get it when I was younger. I don't think I was mature enough or equipped enough. It's a psychological thriller. And I suppose at the time... you don't understand films on that level when you're that age or whatever, and it's only since, you know, as I've got older, that the drama of that, and you know, that I mean, I knew that Pacino and De Niro were going to face off in this scene because that was a lot of the hype press about it.
Mhm.
And when it came, I was like, well, it's just two guys, you know,
Handcuffing.
yeah. But I think it's a real. When I was young, like, there were adult films kind of thing, films that, you know, my mum and dad would watch, and I just used to think, oh, they're for adults, you know. And this is a real, I think, film for adults. And I don't want that to sound like self-aggrandizing, you know, but you have to. I think you have to appreciate it on it's a very serious film. I mean,
well, there's complex issues at play, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's certain things that you only really appreciate as a mature adult.
Yeah.
And that's nothing to do with the guns and the violence and the bloodshed. And that, ironically, you know, you can understand that once you're 12 these days. But it's the deeper themes that are at play within that film, which I find fascinating. So,
and it is brilliantly acted, isn't it?
Well, yeah, let's talk about that because, I mean, it's an incredible cast, most of whom were probably at their peak. I mean, I just talked about Val Kilmer. I mean, he's, you know, down the billing, which at this time in his career was, you know, pretty unheard of. He was a lead actor.
It's going to happen when you're up against Pacino and De Niro, though, isn't
absolutely,
it?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
But then, like, so his crews is Tom Sizemore, is it? Tom Sizemore, who, you know, has not got on to do much more, but at that time was a really solid, great actor. And the guy, John Voight, Natalie Portman.
Yeah, Natalie Portman, very young Natalie Portman.
Yeah, I can't imagine she'd done much at this time.
No, had Leon already would have been about the same time, Leon, I would imagine.
Yeah, probably.
Probably just after Leon, actually, isn't it? But so yeah, so
and the guy who went on to be in 24, Dennis Haysbert.
Yeah.
The guy on parole. That is, I think, as you get older, that whole scenario, you just really feel for him in that. And when he sort of just finally throws,
and it's tiny.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, like I said before, you know, it's probably something that actually, if you wanted to take some time out of the film, you cut him out because he's not in it that much. It's he has very distinct scenes. I mean, obviously, you'd have to reshoot the robbery without him being the driver, but it's just amazing. It's key to. It's the first kind of emotion that you get as everything's starting to unfold. That guy who so quickly we really liked and were really behind. Goes first. Is just absolutely heartbreaking. William Fichtner is another. I absolutely love William Fichtner, and I pick him up in everything he's in. But he's one of those actors who just appears in everything. In I think tragically small roles. But yeah, it's an incredible cast. And Danny Trejo, who you would.
Who
I know you're a big fan of.
Well, he's one of those actors that he crops up everywhere. You see him in a lot of different things. I couldn't even reel off.
He's also, I mean, he's usually a brute, isn't he? I mean, he's usually a very, and he isn't in this.
He's actually quite a likable character. I find
he's a loving. I mean, ultimately, he sacrifices himself because they've got his. I don't know if we know if it's his wife or his girlfriend, but
honourable, isn't it? And I think that becomes quite a theme.
Thieves
in this film. So.
Do you know, I was thinking in advance of this, it's a great LA movie. There are certain movies which are very much kind of... And
it's a Michael Mann movie, and he does absolutely celebrate LA, doesn't he?
Totally, and it looks incredible, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Who was his cinematographer? Was it Wally? Vista, not the robot.
No, it's Dante Spinotti.
Okay. Because there's the famous scenes, the blue kind of... filter when he's standing at that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a look. Again, that's another thing that, you know, actually is in an awful lot of those films now. I mean, if you make, you know, a cops and robbers film in a city, it's going to have a bluey tint to it, isn't it? That was really something that he's very much established. The whole aesthetic of it, I think, is fantastic.
That opening shot, it's a kind of abstract shot. It's like, is it like a tube station or something?
Yeah.
And it kind of shimmers.
It's LA, but
it shimmers though, doesn't it? You know, that you get a sense of the heat of the place, and that's what I mean by it's like a real LA.
Lights. Yeah, you know, you see lights before you really know what they are or what's going on. And then that incredible shot just following De Niro through a hospital. And again, I mean, now I go back to it and I just think that's such a fantastic, cool, it's like a sort of Bourne-esque infiltration scene. He just is in complete control. He knows exactly where he's going. He just puts on the coat. He looks the part. He walks off with an ambulance and nobody's any the wiser. I remember at the time thinking, nothing's happening.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just harking back to what you were saying about it, it's something that you have to kind of be in the right frame of mind, but potentially in the right stage of life to really get. It's there's lots of.
Well, I can see that opening scene actually, and when they hijack the security van, when they ram it off the road, I see a lot of parallels with The Dark Knight in terms of those opening sequences and the pacing of it. It feels very much like that. In fact, they share an actor, as well.
Yeah. William Fichtner.
There you go. I don't know names.
I don't usually either.
But it's just that sense that all of a sudden we don't know who these people are. We don't know essentially what the premise of the film is going to be about. But here we are. There's an action scene to open us out. A hiss and a roar.
In terms of writing, that's something I'm always a really big fan of.
Yeah.
That sense of actually the faith in the audience, that we're just going to drop you into the scene. You're not going to know who these guys are. You don't know whether they're good, whether they're bad. You're going to just find that out by watching it, but you're intelligent enough to work that out.
Yeah.
Which is possibly why, as kind of youngsters, we were lost by it. But I love that. I think that's a really mature. As Michael Mann, he does a lot of that. I think sometimes to the detriment of his audience. I think sometimes a lot of people will lose him because of that.
Yeah.
But I do always like that he puts a lot of faith in the capacity of his audience to just get on board and understand what the hell's going on.
Just let it wash over you a little bit.
Yeah.
Just allow it to run its course and see where it goes.
Yeah. As we're saying all that, I'm thinking another interesting thing about it, though not specifically for this film, but it came out of another film. I think it must be fairly unique in that sense that Michael Mann had already made this film, and it was a far inferior version, and somehow managed to convince the studio that he was going to do it better. So he'd made a made-for-TV movie.
Was it a TV movie?
I think so, yeah. I've always assumed so. Called LA Takedown. With some of the same cast in different roles, which is really weird. Obviously not De Niro or Pacino or any of those guys. Xander Barkley, who plays the affair, effectively, which is a demeaning role, really, in this film. I mean, certainly if you picked roles out of this film and said, as an aspiring actor, who do you want to be? You don't really want to be that guy. He's the guy who, goes up against Pacino, and that's not cool. So he's Pacino in LA Takedown.
Wow.
He's the lead role.
Okay, I see.
Which makes actually that role in Heat all the more extraordinary, because you think, having played that, I mean, I guess anybody's going to go, all right, Pacino's in the room, I'm going to step down. But I think it's a really it's testament to him as an actor that he'll take a role like that just to be in a film that's that good, having played, Pacino's role.
It's just a sort of funny little thing, but who do you think comes off better, Pacino or De Niro in the acting stakes? Who owns the movie for you? Pacino has the bigger role, right? But he has the louder role, and he's Pacinoing it all over the place, kind of thing.
I'm a big fan of the film, so for me, it is the defining Pacino role, and he possibly then, or not immediately subsequently. He was obviously in quite a lot of films around that time, but he has subsequently slipped off radar quite a lot. Whereas De Niro, for better or worse, and probably both, has stuck around a lot more. I think of it much more as Pacino.
As Pacino's film. Yeah, I do, I think, yeah.
I love De Niro's part, though, in this.
I love all of them.
Obviously, but I mean,
great roles.
I love the fact he seems...
Pacino, as you say, does that barking, and actually, whenever people talk about that aspect of his acting, this is the film. She's got a great ass. You got your head right up it. Moment. There's a few of those that are just great.
Yeah.
And work. I mean, in the hands of a director who knows how to go, yeah, that's right, I'll let him do that. He is overacting, but he's overacting because the guy's overacting, And there are other Pacino roles where he does exactly the same thing, and you just find yourself going, "Oh, it's Pacino just being a bit too much," and probably with a director who didn't dare go, "I'll rein it in a bit."
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's Pacino for me, but just because it suits the role so well. De Niro's role is a much more understated character. Also, because Pacino gets that amazing shot at the end where he's at the hospital and everything has just gone to rat shit with his marriage, and then he gets the call and leaves anyway. Which, you know, at which point you're just going, "Oh man, it's just, you know, send another cop. Come on, save your marriage." But he won't, because he's that guy. And then he runs down that staircase, and it's one of my favourite Michael Mann shots. It's almost slow motion. Actually, it's not.
It's not, is it?
No, I always think of it as being slow motion, but it's not. Yeah, it's brilliant. And you know that your final act is really kicking off.
I do feel, though, that De Niro has this quiet, intense intelligence about his character that I find is just so masterful.
Yeah.
I'm not taking away anything from what you've said about Pacino. I completely agree. But I did enjoy his performance in this film a lot. And I mean, I'm quite a De Niro fan anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's an awful lot to like.
Yeah.
I mean, I always find, posthumously, I didn't really think about it at the time, he gets together with Amy Brenneman, which, you know, is testament that
he's a pretty cool guy.
He's a pretty cool guy, because in real life, I'm thinking that's not happening. But he's so convincingly charismatic in this.
God, yeah.
There's just a very cool charisma about him that you just think, yep, fair enough. Most people are going to see that and go, want to be with that guy, want to be that guy.
Yeah. He's very cool. He's very laid back, even, you know, despite all the odds. When he lets go and, you know, he loses his rag, it's clear to see, but you can see it takes a while to build up to that point. Yeah. And I find that great. It's great acting.
The heist that goes wrong, talking about this, one of my favourite parts of the De Niro character, when Pacino and his crew are first onto them, and they're at the heist, and they're like, we can't make a move until they actually do something. You know, that all they're doing at the moment is just breaking into a building. I'm not, you know, going in for that.
Yeah.
And De Niro standing outside. One of the cops in the van makes a noise, and De Niro hears it, and it's just, again, we've said this all the way through, but it's so underplayed. He just knows something's not right. It doesn't matter what it is, something's not right, and he just walks in, and that's it. It's off. We walk away, and he's just out of there. He knows.
And you see all that in like that night vision, don't you?
Yeah.
And so his reaction isn't even like with a proper camera on it.
No, absolutely. Which is an incredible. I mean, an incredible shot. It's very brave directing, but it's also testament to the actor that you can do that and you can know that you're going to get away with it, because his reaction is so palatable. Yeah. But even in sort of reverse contrast night vision, you still know exactly what is going through his head, and he processes it all, and then just shuts it down. It's fantastic. It's great. I mean, it's great writing, it's great directing, and it's great De Niro work.
Love your work, Bobby.
That's the thing, right?
De Niro work. Yeah.
So that closing chase through the airport, there's no the use of music there. It's just that Moby track, but it comes in really late, doesn't it? And all you're hearing and seeing is like the planes going over, and like the way that casts the light and the shadows and stuff. It's all kind of brilliant soundscape, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, lack of dialogue. I mean, we said, you know, the music and the dialogue through this are very kind of dynamic. But yeah, the lack of either at this stage is incredible. Let's talk about the music, because we have a composer here, and I know you're a massive music fan, Sam. Sorry. What do you make of the score, Carl?
Well, obviously there's a lot of licensed tracks in the film as well. Yeah. So I won't necessarily talk about them, because I think Sam probably knows more about them than I do. But in terms of Elliot Goldenthal's score, it's a great use of the techniques of that time. He uses everything synths. He even uses a guitar orchestra in there as well. So you've got guitar stuff, you've got synths, and you've got some really great orchestral writing as well. Really pulls all the tricks out of the bag, but never in a way that seems over the top. I think we briefly touched on it earlier, like the
Well, it helps blend it as well, doesn't it? I mean, it's why he gets away with all the different kind of styles of music cue that he does, because you're never, to me, you're never really sure, and you never need to be sure. I mean, the music is just serving the film. There's never a sense of, oh, we're in a music montage because a song has just come in.
Yeah, there was no sense of a big theme carrying, and there was no leitmotif there or anything that carries a particular character. And so everything was very much underscoring action as it was happening. Like the shootout scene is just a rhythmic pulse. There's a lot of use of pulses and sort of throbbing synth sounds and things that just heighten the tension rather than trying to create, because nowadays it would be a very different score. I think if they remade Heat nowadays, which might happen, they would
probably will
accompany it with a completely different type of score. But it's amazing. I mean, the sheer breadth of the score is awesome. It works really, really well. There was no point that I ever felt that the score sits too high and plays down the action or contradicts the action at any point. But you'd expect that at this level anyway. But everything complements the visual style really, really well. So, and in terms of the licensed music, we were mentioning it. We were talking outside of here about the fact that there's U2 with Brian Eno. There's a Moby track in there as well, and some of the others as well, Sam.
Yeah, but it's as you were saying, it sort of fits seamlessly, and that Moby track, that God moving over the face of the water, that it's all quite kind of homogenous as a score. It's really all kind of, there's a lot of different stuff.
It feels, I probably wouldn't at that stage have known who Moby was at all, and if you'd asked me, it wouldn't have occurred to me that was a track. I wouldn't have thought it was anything other than just part of the score.
Part of the whole.
There's a lovely
the Kronos Quartet are in the score, aren't they? At a point again where we didn't really know who they were.
Yeah.
Lisa Gerrard is in. I mean, she's going to go on to,
I think, the
co-score
scene
Gladiator and things.
They find Al Pacino's stepdaughter in the bath. I think that's the Lisa Gerrard cue right there. It's a really beautiful cue, actually. And
he's used her in other things as well. The Insider has got a lot of Lisa Gerrard in it.
Yeah, really well used. But it's nice to see a director not just sticking with a composer and using a range of sources for different music that fits. It plays very well for the film. The film works very well because of the choice of music.
I've got the soundtrack actually on IMDb up here. William Orbit. Certainly before I would have known who William Orbit was.
Yeah,
is in there. Yeah, extraordinary.
And the interesting thing is, it's hard to know exactly where the composer's job has ended and some of the licensed music is coming in, because it's all so subtly done. You'd expect that with composer's music, but the way that they've mixed the sound, it just feels right. Everything feels balanced. Certainly with certain action films, having a big score that sits above everything else can work really well. I think Interstellar is probably an example of a modern interpretation of a film where the score is actually really intensely loud at times. But this fits this film perfectly. So
yeah, you wouldn't mix it like that now.
No,
that's not how they make them now. Which leaves me to thank Carl Cole and Sam Hoad for joining me, and thank you for listening. Don't forget, you can email us at podcast@sonicfruit.co.uk, or you can tweet at us via @sonic_fruit. The Sonic Fruit Film Podcast is produced by Sonic Fruit, with music by Carl Cole and engineering by Jake Kenny and Jordan Brett. For more information, check out sonicfruit.co.uk.